Hey, welcome back, Erk Pod. It has been quite some time since I've been here with you. Erk Pod, otherwise known as Eric Brook, with you today, coming to you from my home studio in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, located in the Hunter Valley region. Hello, it has been quite some time for people who know me, and it's been quite some time. It's been 2025 years for people who don't know me. I was last a podcaster in 2014, believe it or not. Started podcasting in 2007. How would you describe me then, and how would you describe me now? Back in 2007, obviously, rookie podcaster. The main reason that I started because I saw and heard of people podcasting, and I thought, I've got opinions about stuff, and I was watching the Australian version of the TV show Big Brother at the time. I think it was even the first couple of series. So I can remember one of my early episodes recording in a park somewhere because I didn't want to record at home with a dictaphone. Went on to do lots of podcasts from 2007 to 2014. This version of the show, Erk Pod, is very, very different. Erk's been my childhood nickname since about the age of 10. Some people know it, some people don't. Up until recently, all of my projects have had Erk in the title somewhere. As sort of a personal branding sort of thing. But lots of projects that I'm involved in now don't. But we'll talk more about the future and the present shortly. But this is just to give you an overview of anyone who doesn't know me, or it's been some time. So once the Australian version of Big Brother finished for the season, I thought, I'm quite liking this. What am I going to do now? And that's when Erk Pod was really born. That Big Brother series was called Erk to the Diary Room, which I thought was quite nice. But Erk Pod was born. I'd find things funny in life, in the media, that sort of thing, and talk about it. It was purely audio back then in 2007. Later on, I would have friends involved. It was friends that I knew in person, or it was friends that I'd met over the internet, primarily other podcasters. And I'll get onto a sad note about another podcaster and another friend that I haven't seen or spoken to in quite some time, but I'll get to that in a minute. And so other podcasters started appearing on Erk Pod. I started appearing on their shows, and in the end, I think it was 2008, we ran a series of monthly shows called the Erk Pod Round Table, where it'd be people floating in and out, and it was recorded as if it was live, but it wasn't live streamed. We relied on Skype back then, in addition to people that I had live with me. It wasn't a video thing. Up until recently, I've never been a video guy. But I say that, but I've been doing YouTube for 10 years. Since 2016. So I quite enjoyed that. If I was travelling somewhere, I'd take my audio recorder and do like audio soundscapes, audio tours. Or, as I was a fan of saying back in the day, I'm just going to let the ambience take over. Like if I was walking through a train station or a downtown or whatever, it was almost as if I was taking you with me. If I was doing it today, I'd do it a lot differently. I'd just do video. and I do that now. But this is 2007, 2008, 2009, etc. So the video quality wasn't that great. Uploading things to the internet, not as good as they are in 2025, obviously. So we had the monthly roundtables, and because the way that it was back then, for anyone who doesn't remember, or quite scarily in some cases weren't even born, it took a while to download files. Like, we weren't on dial-up internet at that time, but it still took a while to download media files. So I'd actually split the roundtable episodes up into smaller chunks. So basically I'd do a weekly show of things that either myself flying solo, or any guests that I had with me in person or online would find funny, and we'd sort of riff and talk about our lives and whatever else was going on in the world. So that was 2009, and Erk Pod continued in a similar sort of vein up until 2014. Although we didn't really go on with the Erk Pod roundtables, but I'd have guests on and that sort of stuff from time to time. Then I moved into music podcasting. And you think YouTube is tough. And YouTube is tough when it comes to using copyrighted content and that sort of stuff. And that's probably something that I'll talk about on a future episode. But I think it was 2009, I started interacting with a group of music podcasters from around the world. Joined the Association of Music Podcasting and became a music podcaster. So I'd have to find Creative Commons music, or music where I had the permission from the artists because they were up and coming. They weren't people like Taylor Swift or Metallica or Guns N' Roses or whoever, but they were bands that I'd discovered for myself or other people had sent my way. There were whole websites set up for what we called back then PodSafe Music. And I still see some of those bands that are still performing now. Some of the people are still performing now, but in different bands. People that I've helped promote have done national tours. Maybe not in the band that they were in when I found them, but some bands become bits of other bands. You know how music works. So they've been on national tours. They've played internationally. One of them in particular that I'm thinking of, Red Hook. They were not Red Hook when I found them. Smoke and Mirrors is who they were when I found them. And I wasn't the only person to discover them, obviously. But members from Smoke and Mirrors became Red Hook. Red Hook have just finished another national tour. On one of their national tours, they played support to Smashing Pumpkins. They've performed overseas. Other bands and people in bands that I've helped support have played places like the Sydney Opera House, as a for instance. And so it was quite cool to meet up and watch these people and these bands grow as things went on. I got heavily involved in music promotion. I actually put on my own gig one night. I had some help, sure, but I put on my own gig once of bands that I just wanted to see. And if you've ever seen Wayne's World 2, you'll know that was called Waynestock. So I called it Erkstock. Lots of bands that I liked and the bands that I was promoting at the time, and had a really great night. It was really, really good. And so I enjoyed that. My mum became involved. We were doing, so the music continued. My mum would do her own music show, so she'd find the pod-safe music that she liked. She helped me interview Dave Evans from AC/DC, so she was able to give me some of the historical context and what it was like to go to gigs at that sort of time when Dave Evans was in AC/DC that I obviously didn't have, not being of that age or that demographic at the time. So that was interesting. We did a talk show together called Blast from the Past. And so a lot of it was comparing our lives and our generations, and people were sharing their lives and their generations. That was rather cool as well. Mum's health unfortunately went downhill, and I basically stopped podcasting in 2014, partly as a result of that, and partly because I'd basically done everything that I could in podcasting at the time. I'd done over 500 episodes of Erk Pod. I had done probably a similar amount of music shows. In the end, I was producing Erk FM Australia, which was Australian music, Erk FM International, which was music from outside Australia, Erk FM Metal Monday, because I was and still am a metalhead. So the hard rock and the metal stuff would also get played there. Judy's Blast FM, which was Mum's music show. And then in 2014, I came back from an overseas holiday, including visiting Canada, visiting the US, coming back via Japan. And when I came back from that trip, Mum says to me, it was really hard you being away for that amount of time and being overseas. If she needed help or, there was some sort of emergency, I'd be overseas somewhere, it would be difficult to get back. She says, I don't want to keep you back from your life, but I'd prefer it if you didn't go overseas. If you want to do some Australian trips, and then that way it'd be a lot easier for me to come back if I needed to. And then in the end, I wouldn't say I fell out of love with podcasting, because I still listen to podcasts to this day, but I fell out of love of producing podcasts, and I had a schedule. Boy, did I have a schedule. Now, one of the joys about podcasting is that you could do it whenever, and you can to a degree with things like YouTube if you're not looking to produce live streams. Now, producing live streams is a totally different beast, something that I don't do when it comes to my own stuff. I try to record as if it was live, so my editing is not as extreme. I have heard of podcasters that for every 1 minute of show, they would spend 1 minute editing, and in some cases that was a lot more than that. But, I'm not really a professional broadcaster at this point or that point. So if I made a mistake, and some of the mistakes and some of the tangents we've had on work were quite amusing. I still have, by the way, all the episodes stored off-site in the cloud. But I thought that's where they can stay for a while. I actually thought of re-uploading some at some stage, but who knows? I'm going to park that thought. So 2014, my life changed. Mum was sick. She was nowhere near as sick then as she is now. Spoiler alert: she's still with me. She's still here, fortunately. Even though there was times there that many occasions that I thought, oh, this is going to be it, but that wasn't it. But in 2014, on that trip to America, something wonderful happened, and I discovered the sport of hockey, or for Australians who don't know, ice hockey, because that is different to field hockey or grass hockey, just depending on what market you're talking to. And so I was on a trip to America, and I got invited by a lady that I haven't seen online for quite some time, actually, and that happens as life changes. She was then known as Quizmaster Polly in Portland, Oregon, one of my favourite cities. And she, when I went to Portland, Oregon in 2014, February 2014, she says, do you want to come along to a hockey game with me while you're in town? Cool. I'm up for new things. She had invited me to a couple of her quiz nights that she ran as well, and they were quite cool. I like quiz nights and trivia nights. So I went into hockey not really knowing anything about it. In Australia at the time, you may see it on TV during the Winter Olympics. If there was a massive fight, you might see it on the sports news. You know, there's nowhere near the amount of sport that was on TV then compared to what's available now. So sometimes you'd think you'd go to a fight and a game of hockey would break out. You know, that's the old cliche. And I really loved it. My first game watching was the Portland Winterhawks versus the Moose Jaw Warriors from Canada. I had no real idea of where Moose Jaw was. I had no idea that they'd spend days in a bus coming from Moose Jaw, playing some games on the way, and end up in places like Portland, Oregon. I really had no idea that the age of the guys that I was watching, because it was a men's league, so they were between about 16 and 21, a major junior competition, the Western Hockey League, which is a part of, basically run by Hockey Canada. And they do have some US teams in a US division as well, including places like Seattle. This was well before the Seattle Kraken came into the National Hockey League, the NHL. So I was watching these games, and one game turned into two games. There was a bout of roller derby in the middle. So one night at the same venue I was watching hockey, and then the next afternoon in the same venue I was watching roller derby, which was also quite cool. I'd been introduced to roller derby on my 2009 trip to America. Then Quizmaster Polly got sick to a couple of events that she was going to go to, so she says, I have to cancel these events. The Winterhawks are playing, why don't you go and watch them? So I did. And I was being introduced to people. One of the people that I was introduced to was the arena announcer for the Portland Winterhawks. And the arena announcer is the person that tells you who scored, who won, penalties, that sort of thing. And part of his job is to rev up the crowd, get them excited. So I met him, actually interviewed him for Erk Pod, and found out more about the Winterhawks and the league. I would later find out in future years that some of the people that I'd been watching then and were playing in that competition at that time would go on to the National Hockey League, to the NHL. I didn't obviously know that at the time. I didn't know that the Portland Winterhawk jersey / sweater, depending on where you're coming from. Canadians call them sweaters. Americans and Australian people who watch hockey usually call them jerseys, but the Portland Winterhawk jerseys with the Indian head on them actually came from the Chicago Blackhawks in the NHL in Chicago, who, when the team was being set up, asked them could they use this, like spare and old jerseys. and they actually got permission from the local First Nations people in Portland to use the logo. Interestingly, on a side note now, the Portland Winterhawks don't use that jersey because of cultural issues that have come up since, and that's a long and complicated story, but they don't use the Black Hawk logo anymore, whereas the Chicago Blackhawks in the NHL still do. But it was, being an Australian over there really opened some doors. I met people like the arena announcer, I met the social media people, I seem to recall I met the general manager, the cheerleaders. Yes, they have cheerleaders called the Rosebuds. Walking on ice is hard enough, but they're dancing on ice in the big boots. I got to step onto the ice, I think it was like 90 minutes before the game. And so I was hooked. But I was also continuing the trip. So when I came back to Australia, I thought, well, my friend Sean and my friend Polly and anyone else that was over in America would want to know what the Australian league's like. I'd want to know what the Australian league's like because I'd never heard of the Australian Ice Hockey League. I didn't know that in the same general area where I was living in Western Sydney, I didn't know that there was an ice rink. And it had been there for several years. And I didn't know that in time the team that I was working for, in effect, would be playing out of that ice arena in my same community. Now, I knew coming into it, the Australian Ice Hockey League and the Australian Ice Hockey League community, I came into it at the time knowing that it's not the NHL, it's not what I was watching in Portland, but there were people, and there still are people, who come from overseas to play in the Australian Ice Hockey League. There are people who have played in the NHL that play in the league. There have been many imports from overseas that they come over for a year, they knock it off the list, and then they think, well, okay, I've done it, I'm going home. It's usually towards the end of their career. And then there's some that are like in their mid-20s, they come over here, they like it. Sometimes it's they meet their love of their life over here, so they decide to stay. They've got more opportunities in life over here, they like the lifestyle, that sort of thing. And there's been quite a few that have built a good life for themselves over here in Australia through, or partially through, playing hockey. But I had no idea what to expect. I went to my first Australian hockey game. Now, this will tell you how much the arenas in Sydney have changed since then. It was the Sydney Ice Arena at Baulkham Hills, which is no longer there because it was demolished and the area, because it was on prime real estate, turned into a block of apartments. I didn't know that many years later I would be a hockey commentator, which I am now, slightly skipping ahead. I had no idea that I'd be a social media person for one of the teams in the competition for 2 years and didn't miss one of their games in 2 years, travelling all around Australia. The Sydney Ice Dogs were playing the Newcastle North Stars in the final of the pre-season competition. I didn't really even know until I looked online when the season was, because I was coming off the back of an American winter and the American hockey season coming into the start of the Australian autumn and the Australian winter. So I liked what I saw. I went in with realistic expectations, which some people don't. They just basically expect it to be a carbon copy of the NHL, and that's certainly not that. But if you come in with your realistic expectations, it can be quite good, and has brought me. I've had quite a deal of excellent experiences when it comes to that. So even though I said earlier that Mum was sick during that time, I was still able to travel within Australia. So there was some things going on behind the scenes that I won't talk about that were quite distressing with that over the years since. But in a way, it was my release, my time, and what turned out to be my people. Sort of a continuation of discovering underground, under-talent artists when it came to music and music podcasting. The same sort of thing was happening with hockey. Of course, by this stage, I'd basically decided that my time had come as a podcast producer, and I was just looking forward to going to a sporting event, watching, going home, and that sort of thing. I got sick of watching the rugby league here in Australia since my first American trip in 2009, because it wasn't the same as when I was growing up and going to the old Penrith Park and watching footballers on the weekend that also had jobs during the week. And Australian hockey is still like that in 2025. These people have jobs. Some of them are hockey related actually, but mostly not. Mostly not. Some of them are. And there's been some people who have played and now they're coaching in the league as well. So that 2014 year, my first year, was a real interesting journey of discovery as I got to know the sport, got to know the people, got to know the teams, and they all got to know me. So who was I going to go for? That was a question. Obviously, I had no link with the league. Coming in, discovering it new. Convenience wasn't even a factor because I was living in Western Sydney at the time at Penrith. The Sydney Bears, primarily in red, they were playing at Baulkham Hills in northwest Sydney. And then the Sydney Ice Dogs, playing at the time at Liverpool, which they don't play at Liverpool anymore, at the Liverpool Catholic Club in southwestern Sydney. They were about the same distance away from me, but in the opposite direction. But what really clinched it for me was the luck of the draw, quite literally, because the Bears played a few home games to start the 2014 season, whereas the Ice Dogs were playing other teams in their venues. So I got to see the Bears more. So the Bears were there, their fans, what fans there were, and there's nowhere near the number of fans that there are now, were there. And one of my ways that I was getting to know the sport was by live tweeting it. And that's not really a thing for me anymore. I'm not on Twitter, or as they call it now, X. Haven't been for quite some years. I'm on Mastodon, at Erk Pod. I think it's at erkpod.oz.social. I think it's a little bit more complicated than what Twitter was. But if you get someone to explain it to you, it's quite a good community. Nowhere near as big as Twitter was, but very varied. So I was live tweeting the games. And this is in the day where Twitter at the time only had a 140 character limit. Later on, a few years later, it went up to 280. Mastodon, in comparison, is about 3,000 characters, so you got a lot more time. The Bears didn't really have a full-time social media person, and over that year they learned a lot about social media through me, and I'm no social media expert / guru, as they were calling people at the time online, a schmeg, social media expert guru, but I knew my way around social media at the time. And so I was saying to the Bears management that you really need someone who isn't doing anything else to be your voice of the team, because as it was, there was no live streaming in Sydney at the time. The biggest place where there was live streaming at the time was Melbourne and Canberra and Newcastle. They were the main places. But when you were coming to Sydney, you were coming to an information black hole, unless you happened to read Erk Pod's tweets. So the other teams got to realise that I was a trusted source of information, as did the league themselves. Many discussions over many weekends later, I was actually handed the keys to the Bears social media account at the end of 2014. And my first time with the keys was actually against the North Stars here in Newcastle, with 2 games to go in the 2014 season. 2015, I built up followers during the off season. I was learning about the game, so I figured that there'd be other people as well. More people were starting to get involved. There was a move to Penrith at the time as well, because the Baulkham Hills Arena had shut down. So there was a lot of fans were getting more interested. More people were being introduced to the game. And one thing about hockey live is it's very competitive, but it's also very addictive in terms of things that you can do compared to the modern day NRL, where you're not even allowed to shoulder charge anyone anymore, compared to when I grew up watching it in the 80s and the early 90s. That's a very different world. So a lot of people were coming on board. I was helping boost the profile of the team in the league. And then 2015 season came along, and there were a couple of broadcasters, a couple of radio broadcasters that were used to broadcasting in the more professional sports that were coming along, and another string in their bow, so to speak, was doing hockey commentary. But they didn't have hockey commentary or hockey backgrounds. Mine was slightly more advanced than them, but they were certainly good at what they were doing in terms of other sports that they'd done. And even at that early stage, me being a year in, I said to both of them together and separately, I'm like, guys, this isn't the NHL, this isn't what you're used to in rugby league or Aussie rules or anything like that. Both of them didn't last the season. I basically invited myself onto the coverage and saying, look, I'm the social media guy, but if you need information, I'm happy to give it. And I became a commentator. So we didn't have any experts to, former players or anything to draw upon. So I was the closest that they had to an expert commentator, or a colour commentator as it's also called. So if you're thinking about something like rugby league, you'd have your play-by-play person. In rugby league terms, it'd be Ray Warren. In Aussie rules, it'd be someone like a Dennis Cometti or a Bruce McAvaney. And then you'd have your expert commentary or your colour commentary, adding to what had already happened or what was potentially going to happen based on the expert's opinion. And usually in a lot of other sports, it's people who have played the game. So in rugby league terms, that'd be Peter Sterling or Paul Vaughton, that sort of thing. And same sort of thing in Aussie rules. Same thing, of course, applies in other sports around the world. So I was purely the I was the expert, but I was no expert, especially compared to now. I was still a year in, and I was still doing social media. But people finally had a way, other than reading my tweets, but they could read my tweets as well, to find out what was going on in Sydney. And I can remember lots of people from lots of different teams saying, we're really liking what you guys are doing. You know, it's given us insights into what's going on that we've never had before, or we've just had to read your tweets about it. So when the other two guys left for their reasons, and one of them I found out was leaving because I went over to his house to drive him to Canberra, and he just messaged me and he says, I'm not coming, and that was basically the last time that I heard from him. I did hear later that guy thought that I wasn't very good. Mind you, I was new to the game, and I also was the expert guy, and I was also doing social media at the same time. But through necessity, we didn't want to see this thing die. So I stepped up to be the play-by-play guy, often by myself. I wasn't very good when I started. I'm still learning the game. These rinks were basically what they'd call in Canada neighbourhood rinks. They weren't stadiums in the true sense of the word where there's commentary boxes, all that sort of stuff. You had to make do. Live scoring has improved a lot. Trying to listen to announcements of who scored a goal, for instance, because sometimes if you've ever seen hockey, it's not necessarily obvious if there's a lot of bodies and who touched the puck last before it went into the net. Isn't always easy. Think of soccer or football on steroids and you'd have some sort of idea. But over time, I got better at it. Lots of practice, lots of preparation. And then in 2016, I handed the social media keys over, because I obviously can't do play-by-play commentary and social media at the same time. That was impossible. So my job was to do the running commentary for Bears games when they were playing at home in Penrith. And that extended, and I was doing that all the way until the COVID pandemic in 2019. 2019 was my last season. February 2020 was when we were starting to feel the effects in Australia. And the 2020 and 2021 ice hockey seasons in Australia didn't exist. In the meantime, I'd done a season of the Bears men's team at that stage in 2016. And as a social sort of thing and a way to keep involved and also hang out with my hockey mates, and it's also a cool place to be in summer, I was watching the Australian Women's Ice Hockey League, which plays over summer, and the men play in the winter. So I was watching the Sydney Sirens, which is the Sydney team. At that stage, I should talk about the teams briefly. In the men's competition at the time, there were 8 teams, 2 from Sydney, the Bears and the Ice Dogs. Newcastle team, the Newcastle North Stars. The Canberra team, they were called the CBR Brave at that time. The 2 Melbourne teams, the Melbourne Mustangs and the Melbourne Ice. The Adelaide team, the Adelaide Adrenaline, and the Perth Thunder in Perth. The women's competition was smaller with 4 teams at the time. Sydney Sirens, Melbourne Ice. They were the Adelaide Adrenaline at the time, but they changed into the Adelaide Rush. And also the Brisbane Goannas that are now the Brisbane Lightning. It's almost, you'd almost need a flow chart. Hang on, where's the camera? That flows into that, flows into that, flows into that. There's another team over there, etc. So I became the Bears commentary guy, basically. and I would have lots of people interact with me and tell me what they like to hear, and sometimes they'd tell me that I was doing things wrong or pronouncing somebody's name wrong, and name pronunciations is a very interesting one. I was actually laughed at the time because I said that we commentators should all get together, share information, share things like pronunciations, and a lot of the way that I'd find out how to pronounce people's names would be to look up on name pronunciation websites or on YouTube, or listen to other commentators. But the thing was that sometimes we were saying people's names incorrectly, but no one ever corrected us, so we thought we were right. Skipping forward a bit, just on this subject, and for anyone who doesn't know me, sometimes I do go on tangents. We had a player who played for the Sirens, and I'd been doing commentary at that point for 3 years in the Australian Women's Ice Hockey League, and more about that in a minute. But she didn't think that she could contact me directly with the information to say, hey, look, you've been saying my name wrong for the last 3 years. This is how it's said. She spoke to her captain. Her captain, who I have and had a good relationship at the time, spoke to me. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll do my best. It's obviously a habit now, doing it for the last 3 years, but I really appreciate the thought. Indeed, in 2025, we're learning in the Australian Men's League that there's a player whose name that the whole league has been saying wrong for the last 10 years and more that he's been playing. So that's an adjustment. It's also meant that I can't use one of my great one-liners anymore for when he scores a goal or when he makes a good play. So that's interesting. So mainly watching the Sirens as a way to keep involved, not necessarily looking to do anything with commentary. And I was heading down to Melbourne for the weekend to watch the Sydney Sirens play the Melbourne Ice. The Melbourne Ice had a broadcaster at the time, but for whatever reason that weekend he couldn't do the broadcast at short notice. And I didn't tell many people, especially people on the team, it was going to be a surprise, that I was going down to watch them. But their social media manager at the time, she knew about it and called me knowing that I was coming down. I was actually on the Sky bus. I just got off the plane in Melbourne, was going to the Sky bus to get into the centre of Melbourne, go to my hotel briefly, and then go to the ice house. And the conversation went basically saying, "Oh, the guy's dropped out. I know you don't have any gear. I know you haven't done any preparation, but could you do a stream for us?" Sure, no worries. Just got my iPhone, that'll have to do. And she knew at that point that I'd been doing commentary for the Bears, so I was capable of doing it. Do you mind if I throw in some commentary? Go right ahead. So the Saturday, I did it from ice level. On the Sunday, I was asked to do it from basically the top of the arena, where the camera in the camera positions that are set up for each game. And by the end of that weekend, I was asked to do Sirens commentary when I could, and also the finals weekend was being played in Sydney that year, and I was asked to do commentary for that, and I actually commentated on Facebook Live, of all things, the Sydney Sirens' first championship in 2016-2017 season. One guy with an iPhone wearing a Sirens jersey. 3-4 games that weekend. And that started off a very good relationship, which still exists to this day. Scarily enough, and I don't necessarily subscribe to this theory because it sounds a bit weird, But in hockey, for instance, and in America and Canada at the top level, the NHL, you've got your commentary team for the home team, and you've got your commentary team for the away team. So if you were watching, say, for instance, the New York Rangers against the LA Kings in New York, you would have the option of listening to the LA commentary team or the New York Rangers commentary team, and whoever that commentator was for the Rangers or the Kings, they would be known as, here's blah blah blah, the voice of the LA Kings or the voice of the Rangers or whoever. And so after a while, especially after the 2017-18 season, up until the COVID pandemic, I was known by many people as the voice of Australian women's ice hockey, which was really strange for me because I'm not a woman, and I did have a rather excellent hockey brain, a female hockey brain next to me who would be more entitled to use that title. She didn't use it either, and I never used it to promote myself as that, but that's what people know you as because that's the job you're doing, because we commentated every game together for basically 3 seasons until COVID hit, doing it remotely in a small booth in Newcastle. So we'd send a camera operator who had a camera and a computer and comms gear. They'd send the information to us in Newcastle, and then the team in Newcastle, we'd add the commentary, we'd add all the on-screen graphics, replays, etc. And that became the standard for Australian Women's Ice Hockey League coverage, and is now also what is done across the Australian Men's Ice Hockey League as well. And I'm still heavily involved in the men's competition. The women's competition at the moment, not so much. But hopefully that may change. So it's not really an Australian thing, because the way we do sports presentations and sports production here is that it's a broadcast team that is doing the coverage on behalf of the league or the competition. They're not doing it on behalf of individual teams. Whereas in American and Canadian hockey, you can have the home team commentary team be as biased as you want, like the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm just picking them out of the air. They'll have a feed, and the Vancouver Canucks on the other side, they'd have their own commentary team. So Vancouver fans would listen to Vancouver's commentary, Toronto would listen to Toronto, and they could be as biased as they want because they're going to their audience. Whereas in Australia, for instance, when I was commentating for Bears home games, or as I do now for Newcastle North Stars home games, because the Bears and the Ice Dogs aren't in the competition this year for different reasons, the majority of the Newcastle fans, or the Bears fans for instance, where the home game was, they were already there. They were already at the venue. Sure, the occasional person might be travelling or might be at home, might not be able to see it live, or they'll watch it later. Live, I'm not really catering for those fans as much, but especially in the audio days, but it's still the case today, the majority of the fans that are watching are the away team fans. So if, for instance, the Melbourne Mustangs will be playing in Newcastle in a couple of weeks' time, so I'll be doing the commentary for that on AHL TV. That's a paid subscription service for the Australian Ice Hockey League. So the majority of Newcastle fans will be at the arena, and it will probably be sold out. It's coming up to the time that a lot of the people who are at the venue are season ticket holders. We're not talking about 5,000 seat stadiums, 10,000 feet, 20,000 seat stadiums. So a lot of the people who are there are Newcastle North Stars members. And the same thing happens in Melbourne, etc. So a lot of although the Melbourne Mustangs fans, some of them are really good actually of travelling around and supporting their team, doesn't matter where they go. So they're also watching me. So it's up to me not to be biased against them or for Newcastle. And that's the way that I've always tried to play it, because apart from anything else, that was the way that I was brought up. Didn't matter if I was listening to rugby league on the radio or watching on TV, the cricket, or any other sport that I watched when I was a kid. You might have your occasional commentator. Like, people always joke that, for instance, Paul Vaughton on rugby league was so biased towards Manly because he used to play for Manly. As a for instance. Aussie rules, they could say the same thing about any one of the former players that are now commentators, or the commentator has played for a team and his son is playing for their team. And so there's things about that as well. But I've always tried to be straight down the line. I've always tried to be straight down the line. Coming up in a couple of weeks, actually, it's not even a couple of weeks. It's the end of this week. Oh no, it is. It is next week. It's the weekend of not this weekend, but I don't know. Time's confusing at the moment. It's that Easter period. I'm a shift worker. I wasn't expecting to have today off, but I did a last minute swap yesterday, so I'd have today off, because a friend of mine at work needs the weekend off where I was off. So it's all confusing at the moment. But Mustangs North Stars is coming up, and I will be there. And I will know the two teams in front of me, and I won't be biased towards either one. So over time, my commentary career has developed the amount of interesting experiences that I've had as a result of hockey. Fantastic. It's really weird when people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're that Carnage guy. I know who you are. You're the Carnage guy, or you're the pushy shovey guy." Because when it comes to commentary, I know that everyone watching in Australia wasn't necessarily born with ice skates on their feet and have an ice rink in Canada 500 metres away from their home, and they can skate from the age of 3, doing figure skating if they're female at the age of 5. Pardon me. Although there's a lot of women that are playing hockey now. I wasn't scoring hat tricks at the age of 7, or having my father strap a GoPro to myself as I was training or playing and saying witty one-liners at the age of 7. And the whole internet thinks that it's cute. I wouldn't necessarily, there's some fantastic hockey commentators out there in Australia and around the world. And I know that I'm not the traditional hockey commentator. I know that I wasn't born around the sport. I didn't come out of the womb wearing ice skates and carrying a stick and being able to skate from the age of 3. And I know that I'm not the number 1 draft pick for the NHL anytime soon. I did notice that people would, I know some people were joking that I would only own Bears merchandise. Well, I don't only own Bears merchandise anymore. One of the things that I am doing is I'm designing my own t-shirts based on the Democracy Manifest Sucking on Chinese Meal meme. And that's the shirt that I'm wearing on this episode. Use the discount code ERKPOD10 for 10% off any purchase. Newcastle Sticker Collective, ntlstickercollective.com.au/democracy manifest. Lots of different shirts there that I've designed. It's amazing what you can do with some photos and some templates and some different fonts, etc. Use the discount code ERKPOD10 for 10% off any purchase. This is the shirt of the episode, and it's going to be interesting because I'm going to be recording another episode after this one, and so I'm going to be wearing the same shirt, so that will be the shirt of the next episode as well. That's opened some doors for me. What you're seeing on screen now is going to be the topic of another episode. But hockey commentary, great. I'd have people come up to me because, as I was saying, I don't necessarily overuse like the hockey terms. Oh, that's a box plus one. I only thought about a year and a half ago, there's a couple of people that use that term because they're highly into it. The type of person that was born into hockey and can explain what a box plus one is. And I'd heard it and I thought, well, that sounds cool, but what is it? And so I got somebody else who was also a coach to explain to me what box plus one meant. And he says, oh, you mean 5 in a dice? Well, I guess so. Tell me about that. So some people, if you have a look at the number 5 on a dice, you've basically got one person on each corner in the attacking zone, and then you've got a person in the middle. That's a box plus one, or 5 on a dice, same thing. I don't tend to use it that much, but I will say some weird things that sometimes it's bouncing off the other commentator. We had a interesting example, quite a few interesting examples that I'll probably share at another time. And some of the reactions that will happen as a result of that, I had pizza delivered during a game and I had no idea that the pizza was coming, so I had to deliver it while I was doing commentary. We were off camera, well, except for that GoPro in the production booth. So I had to receive so this is basically how it went. There's a door. Oh, look at that. There's a door on that side. So somebody's coming through the door. I've got an eye on the screen because that's where the game's being brought. Somebody opens a sliding door. The pizza delivery guy gets directed to us because we're the only one in the building. I put my hands out while I'm still commentating to say, give me the pizza. So he gives me the pizza without saying anything. He's seeing lots of different screens and lots of different people trying to figure out what the hell's going on. I deliver the pizza over to my co-commentator. There's the pizza. While still commentating, it was the end of the period and time for some pizza during the break. Awesome, job done. Lots of different things. What's the collective now for a group of goannas? I found out there is none. I've got one thing that I do, and I'll go into much more detail about this on a different episode and maybe be able to illustrate some of the things that I'm talking about. The door of doom and corners. When I was growing up listening and watching rugby league, they'd describe the ends of the ground, the names of the grandstands, but I've taken that to a new level with hockey and other people are starting to do it as well, especially considering that I started doing audio, so I had to be a lot more descriptive. And I just realised when I said that in a way I didn't really describe what I was doing because there will be an audio version of this as well. So for that store, and I'm not going to do it again. Basically, arms outstretched towards the door. Pizza delivery guy slides open the sliding door. I say nothing to him. I'm got my arms held out to him to say, give me the pizza, but I'm looking at a screen doing commentary. He puts the pizza box in my hand. I rotate around because I'm standing up when it was actually happening. I'm sitting down now, and hand it over to my commentator on the left-hand side. I know there's a lot of podcasts that go in video form these days, but a lot of people still listen on audio, so I apologise in advance that if I'm more visual than audio sometimes. So corners and ends. Because I started off as an audio guy, I like to name my ends and name my corners for visual references for people who know the arena. So at the Macquarie Ice Rink in Sydney, which is where the Bears and the Ice Dogs normally play and the Sirens normally play, but that's going to be closed over winter because it's having a massive refit. So the Bears and the Ice Dogs aren't in the Australian Ice Hockey League this season, which partly explains my reduced workload, which partly explains the reasons that I'm coming back to do podcasting, but I'll talk more about that in a minute. So I have at Macquarie the two ends. So I've got the scoreboard end, because that's basically where the scoreboard is, or there's a big expanse of glass windows at one end, which is really painful because of course all the sun comes through it and doesn't help the ice because the ice is in direct sunlight. And then at the other end of the Macquarie Ice Rink is where the food court is. So I call that the food court end. So for instance, I might say that the Sydney Bears in the first period, because there's no coin toss in hockey to decide who's going to kick off or who's going to run towards what end. It's already predetermined where the home team bench is, where the away team bench and dressing rooms are, and which end you'll be at. It's predetermined. So I might say, for the first period, the Sydney Bears will be defending the scoreboard end of the Macquarie Ice Rink this afternoon. And then the other team, of course, would be defending the food court end, whoever that other team was. And you'd have, or as I'd call them, the cheap seats, because you'd be able to watch the hockey from there. You'd be able to see the whole ice. You'd be able to see the scoreboard. There's replays on the scoreboard now. You just don't get any of the arena noise or atmosphere. And so not that those people would probably be listening or watching me, but I'd say the people in the cheap seats at the food court end, come in. Feel the experience. Pay your $15 or whatever it is and come in and join us. And you would have people on a Friday night, you would have people on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, and especially on the Sunday after the shops had closed, except for the food court, and people were watching there because they weren't paying their $15 to come in. So the corners, Zamboni corner, which is where the Zamboni lives. The Zamboni resurfaces the ice surface. So that would be Zamboni corner, which is also at the scoreboard end. Across from Zamboni corner, there was an old, and it's still there, but it doesn't work at the moment, the old Heritage Coke scoreboard at Macquarie Ice Rink. So that would be Heritage corner, or Heritage scoreboard corner. At the other end of the ice at the food court end, you would have the skate hire corner, which is where skate hire is. And then I really didn't have a name for the other corner at the other end of, or the other side of the food court end. I really didn't have a name for it. And I was commentating with Ben, who's the commentator for the Central Coast Rhinos. And I was commentating with him for a Bears game 1 week last season. And he says, why don't you call that the fourth corner? Okay, it's the fourth corner now. Okay, cool. Hunter Ice Skating Stadium, where the Newcastle North Stars play. Now that's an interesting one in terms of ends. I was going to call it the scoreboard end, but they actually have a scoreboard at either end, and now they've got a jumbotron across the ice, at centre ice above the ice surface. So, and then the other end, is it the entrance end? It used to be the commentary end because commentary was at that end, but it's now at centre ice. So I'm more about corners than ends at the Hunter Ice Skating Stadium. So you've got the Zamboni corner. So most rinks have got a Zamboni corner or a Zamboni end, depending on where the Zamboni is. Usually a corner, but sometimes it's at an end, which is the case in Melbourne at the Ice House. So Zamboni corner. Across from Zamboni corner is corporate corner, where there's a corporate box where VIPs or sometimes officials will sit and watch the game in a booth. So that's corporate corner. Along that wall at the other end of the ice is cafe corner, because there's a cafe there. And I remember a tournament last year where I called a ridiculous number of games, and I wasn't doing them all by myself. I've actually got it on my wall over there. I think it was about 49 games or something in the end that I commentated on over a 2-week period, plus doing the Australian League, as there were 4 Ice Hockey Australia tournaments combined into the one tournament over 2 weeks over the July school holidays. And so people working at the rink would watch and listen to the games when they weren't doing anything, and I mentioned Cafe Corner. And I mentioned that my favourite thing from the cafe was the fish cocktail pack, so fish cocktails and chips. And so I was commentating on this one particular game, and sometimes I'd say, "Oh, Cafe Corner, by the way, try the fish cocktail pack." And then when I had other people with me, and I had about 5 different commentators with me during various stages of the 2 weeks, I'd say to them, "So, JD, what's your favourite food from the cafe?" Or, "Gavin, what's your favourite food from the cafe?" And so during that game later on, I'd work it in. "Oh, Cafe Corner, Gavin recommends the coffee first thing of a morning." That sort of thing. So there was this one particular game. Now, we're elevated above the ice, so effectively we're 1 floor up or 1 length of an extended ladder up to the commentary box, the central commentary position. And I was closest to the exit of the CCP. And I feel a tap on my shoulder, and I'm like, hang on, what's going on here? So one of the guys who works at the rink over the last week had watched the games and had heard me mention my favourite thing at the cafe at the Hunter Ice Skating Stadium was the fish cocktails and chips. So during the game, he'd actually climbed the ladder to give me a serving of fish cocktails and chips, which I enjoyed during breaks in play and also during the intermissions. So that was rather nice. He did that for me a couple of times, and that was awesome. Unexpected the first time, because the first time it had happened, he'd actually just placed it on the ground at the entrance to the central commentary position. And because I was concentrating on the game, I didn't know who'd done it. I had no idea, and I've also got an internal comm system that you don't hear on air that talks back to the person running the coverage, the director. And so I'd talk on the back channel, so to speak, and say, "Hey, did you bring me up? Did you send someone up for some fish cocktails and chips? This is during a break in play." "No, it wasn't us." So I'm thinking, who do I know that's at the rink that would have the access to do it? And I didn't find out until I went for a walk around later. And it was this one particular staff member who works at the rink, and he says, "Did you enjoy your fish cocktails?" "Mate, I did. That was awesome. 2 thumbs up. Would recommend." And he did it for me a couple of other times during the tournament as well. And so it was that sort of experience and some of the things I'd work into the commentary. The Door of Doom is an interesting one at Hunter Ice Skating Stadium. You've got certain doors that give you access to the ice surface, and all around the Hunter Ice Skating Stadium, but not a lot of the other rinks around Australia. You've actually got perspex around the ice surface, and so when there's a general skating session or school sports session or whatever, they'd open that door to let people access the rink, and then they'd take out the little bit of perspex. But if there was a hockey game, they'd close that door, put the perspex in, but it's still a door. And I'd heard stories and I'd seen stories of pucks going underneath that door or people's sticks being caught in that door. And so I nicknamed it the Door of Doom. And I was commentating with some other commentators who played a much higher level than me. And I'd say, "Oh, have you ever had any problems with the Door of Doom?" And of course, I'd already mentioned the Door of Doom in commentary at that point, and so they knew what door I was talking about. And out of all the people that I've commentated with who have played on that ice surface at that venue, there's only been one person that has never had a problem with the Door of Doom. The rest of them have. And so I remember talking to the general manager of the team, and I like receiving positive, constructive feedback, and there's been lots that I've benefited from over the time, and I've really enjoyed the progression that I've made. But sometimes when you're doing commentary, you don't know who's watching or how much attention they're paying. For instance, a major thing of commentary is getting to know the rules. There's 4 officials on the ice, 2 referees, and 2 linespersons, and that's their official name in the IIHF rulebook, linespersons. It'd be so much easier if they just called them assistant referees. But what am I going to do? Change the IIHF rulebook, the International Ice Hockey Federation rulebook, which all hockey basically uses that as their starting point for the rules. Oh, so now we have our referees, blah, 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 and blah, 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 and assistant referees, blah, 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 blah. But under most circumstances, it's the referees that decide the penalties. And so I'd be living in fear. Well, yeah, in a way it was fear, but in a way it was a dread as well, because I like to get things right. And you can only see what you can only see on the ice and on replays and that sort of stuff. And people make mistakes. I know I've made plenty. But I would hate to receive an email, either directly or indirectly, from the head referee in Australia, the referee-in-chief, to say, "Hey, mate, you're doing this wrong. You're criticising our blokes. You don't know the rules. You're getting it wrong. Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Go and learn the rules, blah, 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 blah." I don't want to receive those emails, and I never have. And I've actually been complimented by officials for the way that I treat them and the way that I explain rules and that sort of stuff. And I actually did go out and do my referees course and my coaching certificate off-season before last. But I'd always live in fear of receiving that sort of email. Another thing that I was sort of living in fear of was the Door of Doom, because I didn't want the owner of the rink or the general manager of the team coming up to me and saying, mate, I don't like the Door of Doom. I don't like the suggestion that the door's defective, or that it breaks sticks, blah, 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 blah. I don't like it. Stop using it. I don't want it. But I actually spoke to him after a tournament once, and he says, oh, dude, the stuff that you do with the Door of Doom, that's fantastic. Keep doing it. And I try to do things when the situation calls for it. Like if nothing happens with the Door of Doom, I might mention it occasionally as sort of a landmark, just like I mentioned the corners. But I just don't throw it in there for the sake of it most times. And he's like, dude, keep it up. Love the Door of Doom. It's awesome. I always laugh when I hear the Door of Doom. And I says, well, go to Skaters Network, see if they'll put one of their stickers on it, because the inference is, if you break your stick in the Door of Doom, you look up, you see the Skaters Network logo, you go to Skaters Network, you buy a new stick. Which effectively you kind of do anyway, because where else are you going to get a hockey stick from in Australia? There's only a couple of different companies that sell hockey gear. You just can't go down to Rebel Sport or JD Sports or whatever and go buy a hockey stick. You have to go to somewhere like Skaters Network, #not sponsored. But I just thought it would be funny that if on the Door of Doom there was a Skaters Network logo, and there is actually a Skaters Network store in the building, where you can buy sticks from after you break them in the Door of Doom. But I've got lots more hockey stories. Not going to do that with you now. What I am going to do with you now is not necessarily remind you to buy a t-shirt. I've had some great feedback by the way of some of the shirts that I've designed. It's amazing what you can do with templates. But that's the shirt that I'm wearing at the moment. Let's play a game. This is Train Sim World, and this is one of the things that I've actually been doing since stopping podcasting. I run a channel called Simulated Erk, which is also on YouTube, based on simulator gameplay. I'm running another channel which is based on transport, which is me videoing various forms of transport, and that's called a mountain of work, because it is a mountain of work to produce these videos. But with a mountain of work, I don't commentate, I don't have my voice on there, I don't have my identity on there. Still on the railway, by the way. Just notched up my 20-year anniversary of being a train driver. I'm now based in Newcastle, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. And 30 years on the job working for the railways in transport last year. So I've been there a while. But one of the things I've got into, I started doing this in 2016, it's various simulators and role plays. So this is Train Sim World. We'll pick a route. Now I've got so many routes to choose from. But what we're going to do, and you'll see lots more about this on Simulated Erk. We'll go to London. Where are we going to start? We should really start from Elephant and Castle. Elephant and Castle. 10 a.m. I don't know why I've gone back to Fahrenheit, but here we are. There's so much detail in these train simulators and other simulators that I use. There's a really cool one, and I should fire it up for you after this just to show you the difference between that And the Japanese one that I'm thinking of, is actually used as a train simulator for real railway staff. And I've actually been on this more than my real simulator. So we're on foot, so we're not going to drive or anything like that, because I want to talk about what I've been doing apart from hockey. So we're at Elephant and Castle Station on the Bakerloo line, and we're just waiting for a train, which hopefully will arrive soon. Now, in many cases, and in this case, this is all licensed with London Underground. I did actually find a simulator that has Australian trains, which is definitely not licensed. So there's a train coming in 5 minutes or 13 minutes. It sounds like the one... Oh, there's a train over there, so let's go on. Whoops, gotta watch out for the NPCs. Alright, so we're on a train. Where's this train going, by the way? Oh, Harrow and Wealdstone. Okay, it's going the whole way. Sweet. So you can see the amount of detail that's in this. Okay, this is an intermediate cab. Okay, so we're near the driver's cab. But just check out the level of detail. This is actually from an earlier version. This is from Train Sim World 2. The current version is Train Sim World 5, but it still works. So we'll go into the driver's cab. Well, what I thought was the driver's cab. You have one at either end. Is it because I'm on foot? Excuse me, hang on, I've got to get on the train. So we're on the train. I was at the back. My road knowledge of the Elephant and Castle line is lacking. So, what have I been doing since 2014? First of all, when it comes to the railways, and then I'll talk about a more personal subject after that. So, 2014, I was driving. I'd been driving for about 10 years at that point. Oops. Probably won't do that just now. We might just wait for the train to get to the next station, and then we'll go around. So still driving suburban trains at that point in Sydney. Actually applied to be a driver trainer at one stage, 2018, 2019. But in the end, I knew that I wanted to come back to driving inner city trains. I'd been an inner city guard before, in some places think conductor, but I wanted to drive the inner city trains, and I especially wanted to drive the VSET trains, and I'm going to have a whole episode on this sometime down the track, pun not intended, before they went into retirement, which is in the process of happening now. There's the station, the door will open shortly. So I knew to do that I would have to Oh, platform's on the other side. So why did that... Now, I shouldn't have been able to do that, but I did. And the train shouldn't have been able to move with the door open. That's another story. So I would have to transfer depots, and I transferred depots in 2019. So instead of driving trains within an hour's radius of Sydney, I was now driving trains within a 3-hour radius of Sydney. So I drive up to the Boy Mountains, I drive down the south coast, and I drive to Newcastle. And then circumstances changed with Mum's health, where she needed to go into a nursing home. Now, I'd always liked the Newcastle area. My first visit up here in 1997 was actually Steamfest 1997, and I'd liked the area, not just for the trains but the whole area. You'd have me grown up in Western Sydney near the bottom of the Boy Mountains, wanting to live on the coast where there's all beaches and everything, but that'd be awesome. I think this is more the middle. Yeah, the door's open. Oh no, we are at the end. Okay, so we're near the driver's cab. Cool. So we'll pop in and say hi to the driver, who isn't me. Hey, how you doing? When this route first came out, a lot of people who aren't train drivers and didn't have any experience of going through the London Underground, they go, oh gee, it's awful dark down there, can't really see a lot going through the tunnels, but that's the way it is, and that's what a train simulator does. I can remember doing a New York episode, Long Island Railroad, and the scenario was that I was at a station and I had to pick up a train. Hang on. I don't know how I ended up out there, but anyway. So we're coming into the station. Now, it doesn't animate what the person's doing with the controls, because it's the way it's supposed to work. If you're driving, excuse me for sitting on your lap for a moment, but that's the view that you have, so you don't necessarily see yourself doing the work, because that animation would be a lot harder. So I'm in the Long Island Railroad. I'm moving to what I think is my train. And I go to the train, I go to the front of the platform, to the front of the train, and the train cab is a lot different, and they darken. The stations are very close together at points, so this train driver's got a lot more room here than in the New York model. So in the New York model, where I'm basically standing now, there's a wall, and the driver's compartment is very, very small. Where the train driver's sitting now is basically all the space that they've got, but the door's closed and I can't see that there's a train driver in there, because there's a train driver in there and there's a female train driver in there, where I was expecting no one, because I was thinking that's my train. And it wasn't my train. It was somebody else's train, and somebody else. Okay, so instead of talking about it, let's go through, and this is good practice for if I do a reaction video. So I'm going to react to my own stuff up here. This version of it was recorded in January 2022. I think it happened actually a lot earlier than that. But let's watch what happens here. So the first thing we'll see is a train coming towards us, the start of a scenario, and me thinking that this train is actually the train that I'm going to be taking. Kings and Queens, here we go. So we're at Atlantic Terminal, and there's the train, the 1228 to West Hempstead, which looks like it is arriving now. Engineering work at Locust Manor means this service is only running as far as Jamaica. Okay, so we have to walk. We have to walk towards the other end of the train. So at this point, I know that there's people getting off the train, so I've got enough time to walk up to the other end because it's terminating here. We'll go out in the other direction. So while these people are getting off, I will have time. The driver, who also controls the doors on these trains, they will get off this train. They mentioned a short turnaround, so this train is heading back, as far as I'm concerned, in the direction in which I need to go. So I'm just dodging passengers, NPCs, non-playing characters. So there's not as many people at this end of the train. Then I realise that the doors are starting to close. So by my way of reckoning, there should be nobody actually controlling the doors, because there should be nobody on board, because the driver's just arrived. And I'll be the next driver, so I'll be the next person controlling the doors. So I thought. Okay. So we'll get into our cab. We'll close that door. Oh, hello, what are you doing there? Sit in engineer seat. She's already sitting in the engineer seat. And I've actually tried to, because it says there, press E to sit in the engineer seat, knowing that there's already somebody sitting there, and I tried it and it didn't work. Sit in the engineer seat of the train. You are sitting in the engineer seat. Am I sitting on the wrong train? Let's see what happens. Uh-oh. No, it's not going to let me sit in the engineer seat. What is going on? I am the engineer. What's going on? Hello. It told me to go this way. Now, hang on. What? Am I even on the wrong train? I could be on the wrong train. I was on the wrong train. There's the train. People are waiting. I've obviously sped this footage up. So I called this one Simulated Erk versus HR, because I thought that I was walking in the right direction. The train had just come in, that train will go back out, because I had that tunnel vision of train go out, screen says that I don't have long before I'm due back out, and it's placed me on that platform at the start of the scenario, so this must be the platform. But it wasn't the platform, and I found a female driver sitting where I thought that I'd be sitting. Trains do run very differently around the world, but it's a this is an earlier version of Train Sim World, by the way, as well. So we're coming up to our next station. Does Simulated Erk still have a job? There might be a better way that I can do that, but so I just thought that I'd show you that. Show you that now. Probably a better way to do that, and I'll get better at that. But that's one of the funny things that can happen. So back from New York on the Long Island Railroad back to the London Underground. So I've had lots of different adventures. There's various train simulators. This is Train Sim World. There's another train simulator from the same group that I'm calling Train Simulator Classic because that's its new name. The one that I'll show you at the end of Train Talk is, as I was mentioning earlier, used by a real company to train real drivers. So back to my story. I went inner city in 2019, so my span of operations had moved from an hour away from Sydney to 3 hours away from Sydney. End of 2019, Mum got really sick, and I thought, this is going to be the end, or if it's not the end, it'll be her moving into a nursing home. 3 months in hospital, and they said to us that maybe it's time that she considers going into a nursing home. I couldn't necessarily do what I could do to help her anymore. Her needs were way too advanced for my level of expertise, and a male helping out a female, especially a parent, has added complications that, for instance, a male nurse doesn't have with a female patient. I think we all know where I'm going with that one. And so the day that she actually agreed to go into a nursing home, and the day that we actually found a nursing home for her to go into, I felt like I could walk through walls and bring world peace. I just felt that relieved and that powerful to think that I've done this. My mum's a stubborn old mule. From that boomer generation. But I managed to convince her to go into a nursing home. She went into a nursing home because they said you can't stay in hospital forever. You can receive the level of care that we're giving to you in a nursing home, or an AirCat. Some people around the world call it different things: retirement village, that sort of thing. Aged care is the umbrella term that they tend to use in Australia. They used to call them old people's homes. And so I found her a really good facility in a suburb of Newcastle, and the place had only been open for about 18 months or so. settled her in. All of the problems that she'd had in hospital in terms of, she'd complained to me that doctors and other staff would just walk in. She had a room to herself, but the doctors and staff would just walk in at any time. Didn't matter what was going on, if she was asleep or whatever. And even like when I went to see her, I'd do the same thing because the door was always open, so I'd just walk in. So we made a rule, for instance, that because she had her own, and she still does have her own room at the aged care facility. Didn't matter if it was me, one of the staff, the doctors, nurses, or whatever. Her door was always closed, and to enter, we had to knock. Even I had to knock and say, "Hey, I'm here." And if she was having a good day, she'd tell me to come in, which any time I really did this, she did say to come in. Or it also meant that she wasn't asleep, or staff weren't in the middle of helping her out or whatever. There were times where I had to leave the room because personal care had to be given, so I'd leave the room and they'd tell me when it was okay to come back in. She'd complain about the TV in the hospital never working. She had a beautiful TV in, and still does, in the aged care facility, and she can watch whatever she wants, and so that was a problem solved. So the hospital was too noisy. Aged care facility, really great in that regard. So I'd taken 3 months off work, and was running out of leave, so I had to go back. And I'd say to her, and I'd said to the staff, I says, she's in Newcastle. I'm still in Sydney at this point, February 2020. I'd applied to transfer to Newcastle, but I wasn't able to at that stage, and I didn't have a date when I was able to. So I'd say to her, I'll call you up from time to time when I'm in Sydney. When I'm on a day off, I'll come up and see you. There was instances in that first week where she reported me twice to the police as a missing person because I hadn't contacted her. I hadn't contacted her because I was asleep, because I was on night shift, and she knew that, but wasn't all her fault. A part of it was her medical, and still is her medical condition. She's now got advanced dementia, amongst other things. I've been told on more than one occasion that we'd be losing her. We haven't lost her yet. She had a birthday a couple of months ago, 74 now, which might sound young to some people, but considering her upbringing and how things were, and the conditions that she's had, the things that have happened, she's done remarkably well to get to 74. Certainly outlived her two brothers and her sister, that's for sure, by a big margin. And it was then that she broke contact, and I haven't spoken to her since. I continue to do everything in the background, which enables things to operate behind the scenes. And I'm sure she realised that it's me doing it. I get updates from the aged care facility, and she's doing as well as can be expected. And she's in the best place for her. She's in the best place for me. So that was February 2020. So I thought, okay, now is the time to move on and pack up 40 plus years of my life in Sydney, 40 plus years of her life in Sydney. She's not coming back home, and she's going to be there for the rest of her life. So I need to move on, and she needs to move on. And I'd always, as I said earlier, love the Newcastle area. Moving to Newcastle has given me so much opportunities in relation to hockey, because that's where one of the broadcasting groups for the Australian Ice Hockey League is located. Thor Fox Media Group. Shout out, crew. And also work has been pretty good as well. I now have been living in Newcastle for nearly 5 years. I moved up here May 2020. Been driving at Newcastle since August 2020, so it's nearly 5 years for that. I knew that I was going, but I just didn't know when. So I was using the time when I wasn't working to pack things, etc. And we also had COVID to deal with. So being a train driver, I didn't really have any restrictions on me at that time while I was working. But as soon as I finished working and got home, I was a member of the community just like everybody else, and had to do whatever else people in the community were doing. And I'll do a whole episode on how that was for me, because there's some interesting stories in relation to that, and just how things would change, how things would just change over time. So finally, after living in Sydney, I didn't have the added complication of coming to see Mum in Newcastle anymore, so that was a relief, I guess. And she'd always shut various members of the family out at different stages. I never thought that it would happen to me, but it did. It was her choice. There's no use arguing with her about it. There's been a couple of times that she's tried to call me, but there were some pretty horrific things that happened that I'm not going to go into. Hockey and work were my real saving graces during some of those times. And from what I know now, and from what I've learned in the meantime, it does help to talk about these things. And I've done a lot of talking about it with other things, and a lot of things have happened that I'm not necessarily going to go into detail with at the moment. But it was hard times. It was probably July 2020 when I got the call of, this is when you're going to Newcastle. Your transfer's been approved. You're going up on this date. I was still in the process of moving. Not knowing where I was going to go. I was looking at places in Newcastle to go during that stage, between the time of putting the transfer in, being accepted, but not knowing when I was going. So I was looking at the market to see what was going on, thinking about the effects of COVID and the pandemic and what that was doing, and what I could do and what I couldn't do. But now I actually had a date. So I decided to make the move to Newcastle, despite not knowing when that date actually was. As soon as the letter came in, says you will be going to Newcastle, your release date from Sydney is to be determined, but it will be soon. So as soon as that happened, I thought, well, the places that I've been looking at, I better start pulling the trigger, because they could say to me next week, buddy, you go to Newcastle, and I'd still be living in Sydney. So at the end of May 2020, found a beautiful rented apartment, fully furnished, which was good. Moved in there May 2020. So from the end of May 2020, basically to the start of August 2020, I was commuting to Sydney. So what that basically meant for me is that I would have a start time at work in Sydney that I'd have to figure out, okay, well, if I'm starting at 3:30 in the morning, what train do I need to get? What time do I need to leave Newcastle to be in Sydney, knowing that sometimes the trains wouldn't link up with my start times, and the same at the other end. Then I would have to work up to 10 hours a day in Sydney, driving to wherever I was driving. Maybe it was back up to Newcastle or out to the Blue Mountains or down the south coast. So what I tried to do, I tried to get away from the jobs that came back to Newcastle as much as I could. So instead of coming north, I would swap people, so I was going south or I was going west, because I was going north to go home anyway. There were times where my first or my last train actually wasn't out of Sydney, it was out of Gosford or Newcastle, so people were swapping me those shifts as well. So instead, on some occasions, instead of leaving home 3 hours beforehand to get to work, I could be at Newcastle at my Sydney sign-on time, get a train to Gosford, where my first train will be leaving from, and still be there on time for my first train out of Gosford. It was even better if there were trains, if my first train was out of Newcastle, it was even better. I can remember one weekend where the only thing that I had to do was to drive a train from one platform to another at Central, and that might not have even happened, so effectively I'd just be sitting around on standby for the rest of that time. So I didn't want to do 6+ hours travel to maybe or maybe not move a train. So I actually asked the roster clerk, I says, I don't care where I go, can you get me something around about the same time where I'm actually doing something? Because they all knew that I was waiting to go to Newcastle. I knew that it was going to be tough for those first few months, and then after that, I realised that I'd be living a lot closer. I'd always worked where I had to drive or catch a train to work, but once I started working out of Newcastle, I knew that from the mailroom I could actually see my apartment block, so I could walk to work. I could get up half an hour before my shift started and have a shower, get dressed and walk to work and be on time, and that was so much better. And I managed to do that for 4.5 years until I moved where I am now, which is slightly further away, but in the same still in the same general area. I have walked it. It's about a 15-minute walk. But this next bit will shock you if you knew me back in the Erk Pod days. I hated early morning shift. I hated the early morning shift partly because I had to travel to get to work. And so all I thought that early morning people were good for was giving me afternoon shifts that they didn't want, and I'd give them morning shifts that I didn't want, and everybody would be happy. When I first came to Newcastle and I finished the training, we're about to go away from the underground section of the underground. So when I first came to Newcastle, finished the training and everything, I went on to the afternoon rosters. But I found that a lot of the afternoon rosters were actually overnight rosters. So I wasn't seeing the sun. I got a pretty bad vitamin D deficiency. And so I ended up transferring to the day work roster, which was good for getting vitamin D, but not always good for hockey. So now I'm on the early morning roster, and all the hockey games that I commentate on in winter are in the afternoon. So for instance, now that I actually think about it, and it is actually this weekend, now that I've got the calendar straight in my head, on Sunday what I can do, because the game's on Sunday, I'm actually now working early Sunday morning, But that also means that I'll be finished really early, mid-morning, I think it is, by the time I finish. Then I can have a nap, because the game's in the afternoon. I can have a nap, I can go to the game, I can commentate on the game, and then I can come home. Hockey commentary is mentally draining, which really helps me for good sleep for the next morning, and do the morning shift next Monday. So actually being on the early morning roster is really helping me. I'm coping with it pretty well, which is surprising. But a lot of that is because there's an end in sight, in terms of I need to do this, especially in winter, because hockey's in the afternoon, so I can work in the morning. If I've got the weekend off, it's even better. And I can just do my roster. I don't have to do any swaps. I spend a lot of time swapping, giving away weekends, and then finding the person would be complaining because they were never home with their misso on the weekend, because they were always working. But they were also getting the benefit of the money that, the extra money that you get from working on weekends. Swings and roundabouts. But I don't have to worry about that now. I can still work in the morning, have a nap, do my hockey in the afternoon, sleep, get up, do it again. But I'm really loving working out of Newcastle now and being so close. So instead of when I was in Sydney on intercity trains, working a 3-hour radius of Sydney and going up the Blue Mountains and going down the south coast and coming to Newcastle, I'm now basically working within a 3-hour radius of Newcastle. So I'll go down to Sydney, spend up to 3 hours in Sydney, then come back. Or I will do, and that's on the electric trains, and I will go into that in detail in another episode. And coming up soon, I will tell you about what I've got planned, or what I've got in mind for this new version of Erk Pod. Or I can drive the local 2-car diesel trains on what used to be the suburban Newcastle network out to Maitland. Or I can go a bit further and I can go out to Scone or out to Dungog. And so it's a great feeling when you get away from the wires, and at times I feel like I'm a regional driver, and I actually did apply for regional at one point. But here's where I'm going to stay. Quite happy with my life in Newcastle. Good group of friends. The work's pretty good. A lot of opportunities that I've got with hockey that I wouldn't have had if I stayed in Sydney. And in some ways, when the Bears and the Ice Dogs are playing, which I know I said earlier aren't playing this year, because of the wonders of remote commentary, I can still do those games as well and still be in Newcastle. But it is a different feeling. It is a different feeling live. So, what have I been doing? Well, working in reverse order. Newcastle Sticker Collective, which didn't actually start in relation to t-shirts. Last year I was looking for a change in 2024 and taking a career break from the railways and doing other things. For instance, I've always wondered what the world of traffic control was like. So I'm a fully qualified traffic controller. Not that I've had any time away from work to do it, but I'm fully qualified there. And then I thought, you get your hard hat, you get your safety vest, and you get your gear that you wear to say that you're a traffic controller. but there's nothing really on the helmet. Oh, there's a freight train. There's nothing really on the helmet that says what level of traffic control you have. If you're a first aider, for instance, you'll have the first aider cross, the white cross with the green background, and you can put that on your helmet. And there's some other type of stickers that you can get to that signifies what sort of work that you do. And there's different colour codes for different functions. But when it comes down to traffic control, in New South Wales at least, HST, in New South Wales at least, there's 3 levels of traffic control. But just by looking at a traffic controller, especially if they're a casual and you don't know them, you don't know just by looking at them what level of certification that they've got. I've got the first 2. So the first level is basically just operating the traffic control equipment and acting as a stop-go person or stop-slow person. And then the second level is when you see all the witches' hats and all the signage and everything, setting that up and taking it down. I'm qualified to that level. And then the third level is basically designing the worksite plans, worksite protection, risk assessments, all of that sort of thing. And that's implementing the traffic control plans, etc. I'm not qualified to do that. But I thought that I would have different stickers, and every state, being Australia of course, we have different state laws and different qualifications in every state. So to be a bit of a chance to bling up your safety hat as well, your hard hat. But then I thought about, of course, this and the Democracy Manifest Succulent Chinese Meal Guy. And people who have been watching Erk Pod for a while would remember that I actually did some Erk Pod merchandise. Nowhere to this level. And I've designed all this myself, by the way. Use Erk Pod 10 as the discount code on any purchase. I was wearing other people's Democracy Manifest shirts, and I'd always get good reactions like, "Oh, dude, that's a cool shirt." And I'll do an episode on that, in case you haven't heard the Democracy Manifest / Succulent Chinese Meal Guy meme. So I decided I'll design my own shirt, and this is one of many designs that I'm wearing today. I thought, okay, well, might as well, it'll give me another string to my bow, it'll be another thing that I can do when I'm taking my career break. Because a lot of the thing about the career break, I still like driving trains, but having little control about when you do it, like there might be some times, like school holidays for instance, where it might be really busy on the roads in terms of driving, but there might not be a lot of road work going on. So you might decide, don't want to really do traffic control this week, let's do something else. I looked into being a courier driver. I spent a day with one of the local courier companies and decided that that was not for me in terms of financials mainly. I have delivered for Amazon, and I was looking to do that a lot more, but I still haven't had the career break. I had to move from the apartment to the house that I'm now in, and I'm really I moved in here December of 2024. It's now April 2024, and it's only now that I'm really starting to feel settled here. Oh, there's a Heritage 1938 stock. That's cool. It's really now that I'm starting to feel unpacked and that sort of stuff. So yeah. So there's that. Fully qualified traffic controller. On YouTube I'm busy. Simulated Erk, which we're basically seeing an episode of Simulated Erk now. It's obviously not me controlling the train. So departing the station. So Simulated Erk, I've got a whole heap of editing that I'm in the middle of doing. There is a set schedule. SimulatedErkGaming.com or Simulated Erk on YouTube. There's a mountain of work. A lot of mountain of work, by the way, is done on my phone, and it's basically transport videos where I don't talk, don't narrate. I don't sound like a 12-year-old YouTube vlogger. Hi folks, like, subscribe, this is train, blah 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 blah. I just want you to be able to put it on. There are captions and details about each train on the screen, so you can just sit back. You don't have to hear any voices or anything like that. There are some channels that I like the visual content, but I don't like the person or the voice, so I turn it down. That channel's doing way better than Simulated Erk is. But they are niches, and I know that I'm not going to be able to retire from being a train driver just so I can do YouTube full time. Now, I know of people that have made what used to be their side hustle their main career, and what they do, but they have to work extremely hard to do it, and they would probably have more money. But of course money isn't everything, more money, etc., if they were just doing a 9-to-5 job. But what they get out of it is so much better, and they like being their own boss and like being creative and that sort of stuff. Like as I mentioned earlier, hockey commentary's been good, and working as part of a team there, I know that it's just not all about me, and that there's so many people that are involved in that process in doing live sport. Some of the jobs I've done, apart from commentary, in terms of the live coverage, as I said, I'm really enjoying that. But I can do these things around train driving. I try to have a balance. So there's not going to be a set schedule for Erk Pod. I know when and I can still remember the schedule that I'd set myself, and a lot of it was doable because I could do it at any time of the day or night, and it was all recorded. And the way that I recorded was that there'll be minimal, if any, editing, and then just uploading and things like that. I'll have to do a couple of minor edits to this episode, but not much really. So there's not going to be a set day that it's coming out. For instance, when I was doing Erk Pod and what became Channel Erk Podcast, Monday was Erk FM Metal Monday, and Erk Pod, when it came out, was Tuesdays, I think. Pardon me. Erk FM International, as it became, was Wednesday. What became Erk FM International was Friday. Blast from the Past, which was a talk show with my mum, came out Saturdays, and Judy's Blast FM came out on Sundays. Busy schedule. If I have a look at the Simulated Erk schedule, but episodes don't always come out Episodes don't always come out because I haven't got shows necessarily ready to go in those categories. On Monday is emergency role plays and motorsport. On Tuesdays is trucks and buses. On Wednesday is what I call Workshop Wednesday. So anything that really doesn't fit into another category but is still a simulation. For instance, renovations, lawn mowing simulator, power wash simulator, the mechanic games, that sort of thing comes out on Wednesdays. Trains and trams come out on Fridays. I used to do sports on the weekends, and Friday was either Farming Friday or for flight simulation. But the joy about this, and this is what I would do, I'll use last year's hockey season as an example, because I was busier last season than I am this season because of the two Sydney teams not being in the competition this year. So what I would do during summer, I'd play a lot because I wasn't doing hockey commentary in the summer. So I'd do a lot of recording and then editing over summer, and then I would space the episodes out. So that come out year round, but I wasn't doing anything related to Simulated Erk over winter. Because over winter I was doing hockey and work. And then over summer I was doing Simulated Erk and I was doing work. Now that a mountain of work has come into play, it's year round. But if there's not a lot happening, well, there won't be much coming out. I try to do an episode a month where it's basically of all the trains that I've seen. Now, it's not just necessarily the ones that I'm driving, but it's usually other people's trains, freight trains, steam trains, etc. We've just had Maitland Steam Fest, so that's been cool. And I'm actually in the process of editing the Maitland Steam Fest episode as we speak. So there's not going to be a game plan when it comes to Erk Pod in audio form or video form. I'm hoping that there's enough of me talking that if you want to listen to it just as an audio podcast, you can. But there's more for you in the visual realm. And as I said earlier, I've always been an audio guy. But it's only since starting Simulated Erk that I've moved into more video production. And also some of the things that I've learned through hockey production come back. And a lot of it's to trial and error and working out different things. I've become a lot better with my graphics and that sort of thing. And like when I did do a version of this yesterday as I'm recording this, but I changed a setting that I shouldn't have changed, so I lost the episode. But I think this has turned out better anyway. So no real plans. It's not going to come out on a set day or anything like that. It's not just going to be me talking about, this is what's going on my life, but it's been a longer episode, this episode, because for some of you who remember me back from podcasting days 2007 to 2014, a lot of water's gone under the bridge since then. And for those of you who didn't know me 2 hours or so ago, you know a lot more about me now than you did 2 hours ago. And I don't know how you found me, but hello. I've been watching a lot of reaction videos. And I'm not going to be like a total reaction channel. Train driver reacts to... And I've never really heavily promoted the fact that I'm a train driver on Simulated Erk. Like you'll get There's a couple in the UK, for instance, that will go, freight train driver drives London Underground route, or that sort of stuff. Or they'll actually produce real-life train content explaining the signalling system or something like that. I'm not going to do that. But there will be time that I could share a story or two, or share an experience of something that might happen, or a difference between this train that we're watching now, a 1972 tube stock, compared to what I drive, for instance. I'll probably do an episode of things I drive. And I've got the video medium now, compared to what I had before. Still love audio, still listen to podcasts. From time to time I'll share podcasts that I'm listening to, audio books that I've listened to, there will be some reactions and going more into depth about things that I see on the internet. I'm heavily into watching what other people do at work. For instance, I am watching a channel called Clearview Driving based in the UK. And so the driving instructor's got a learner driver, whole heap of cameras on the car and on the person. And they go ahead with the permission of the person, and they talk about what the person's doing right, what the person's doing wrong. You can follow the story of people as they have more lessons, and they do what they call over there mock tests. So you're still with a driving instructor, but you're being assessed rather than coached. And that's a good learning experience. So different driving over there in England. We've got another freighter coming up. Maybe I should... Can I... Didn't work possibly the way that I thought it would work, but there we go. Another freight train. How you doing? All right? And so I might feature that on an episode and talk a little bit about it, and it's a way of sharing. Okay, well over there they do this way compared to here in Australia we do this way. This is what happened when I drove in America, or this is what happened when I was on the Eurostar, for instance. So there might be some of that as well, but it's just not going to be me talking about what's happening in my life and all that sort of stuff. A lot of what Erk Pod used to be about was finding funny news stories that entertained whoever found it. For instance, there was somebody in Russia and they'd blown some ridiculous amount that they should really be dead. And then we went looking, because there was a whole group of us, it might have even been a round table thing. There was a whole group of us and we'd be like, oh, that person blew, say, .179, and really, that person should be dead. And then you'd go, oh gee, I wonder if anyone's gone any higher than 1.79, and so you'd look up and you'd see somebody in Russia that had blown .258 or something like that. And now, of course, there's a whole lot more to react on. I'm on Facebook and I read it, and I do a lot of shopping via Facebook. I'm scrolling through Facebook. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's have a look at that. Let's see where I can get that from. Let's get it delivered on Amazon or whatever. I'll read what's going on. I'll interact with people. I'm open for Facebook Messenger conversations with people that I know. But I haven't done a status of mine since before COVID to say, oh, this is what I'm doing today, or this is what happened today. No, I don't do that. One thing that I probably should have mentioned 2 hours ago, when we did Erk Pod, the original audio version, or the OG Erk Pod, we never used our full real names. We just usually used our first names or our nickname. And since doing hockey commentary and hockey media, I've gone away a little bit from the Erk thing because, you got to have some credibility, and Eric Brook really came about. It's not my real last name, but it's close enough to it. And that was sort of a family tradition. It's a bit longer than that, but you'd call up to get some Chinese takeaway or whatever. And if you can use Brook rather than something that's 18 letters long over a phone to someone who doesn't really speak the language, and if there's a situation which doesn't need your legal name, why do it? I've actually thought about changing my legal name to Eric Brook, but that's another story for another time possibly. But we are coming to the end of the line. We are coming to the end of the episode. All of these episodes, by the way, won't be almost 2.5 hours long. Can we go? So here we are. We are at the end of the line. The driver has already left. I think we'll just wait here and then get out of the station when the train gets back there. So all these episodes won't be 2.5 hours long. Why am I doing it again to finish up with? There's a couple of good reasons and a sad reason. I think I'll talk about the sad reason first because I don't want to finish on a downer. When I was doing the original Erk Pod, I met so many nice people from around the world and interacted with them. The vast majority of people were good, and I actually met up with quite a few of them. I really love going overseas, and like for instance, my old mates Shauno and Jen, I'm sure they're watching. I'll have to let them know to watch San Luis Obispo, Hyper Nonsense, amongst other projects that they've done and things that we've shared over the years. I've done 3 trips to the States and seen them all 3 times. Just a shame that America's so far away, and it costs a lot of money to move here, because I'm sure that Shauno and Jen would rather be here than in America at the moment, but I won't talk about that. But met a lot of people when I was in America, and then when I went to England, met a lot of people over there. A lot of that was to do with music podcasting in England and in Europe. But one of the places that I went to was Chicago, and met up with my old mate Richard from the Wasting Time podcast as he was doing that. And he was one of the first podcasts that I listened to, just searching the iTunes store and just listening to various people going about their daily lives sort of thing, and back in the 2007, 2008, 2009, etc. And so I'd sometimes go on his show, he'd come on mine, we'd do round tables, we'd interact and that sort of stuff, which was cool. Funny story before we get to the bad news. We were often joking about Foster's beer and how Australians don't drink beer. It's supposed to be Australia for beer, as Richard would say. It's supposed to be Australian for beer, and you guys don't drink it because we mainly exported it. I wonder if we are going to go. You can actually sit down as a passenger, so you don't have to be standing all the time. So we'd stir each other up, and he'd say, if you ever make it over here, come over to my house and we'll have to get you to drink a can of Foster's. Now, Foster's was produced in Australia, mainly an export beer, something we didn't really drink or like. Very popular in England, for instance, especially back in the day. And I wasn't a beer drinker then, not a beer drinker now. I'd mainly drink spirits. I'd mainly drink spirits. Then I've hardly drunk alcohol. I can't even remember the last time that I actually drank alcohol. But I was a spirits guy. But I said, Richard, I promise when I come over and see you in Chicago, I'll drink a Foster's for you and we'll do it on the show. Sweet. So we did. So we went to the liquor store. We brought a couple of cans of Foster's over to his house. Now, we spent some time in Chicago. We went downtown and we said, we're going to do the show, so we'll have the... I can hear a train. Oh, there it is. That's cool. So we'll do it on air. Now, I knew that I didn't like beer. I'd already said to him, mate, I don't drink beer, I don't like it. But I'll do it for you. So, recording, and, we're just chatting, how's the trip? That sort of stuff. I was halfway through the first part of the trip going. I started in LA, and over time I will share some of these stories from some of the travels. Up the west coast and across the north, going into Chicago. So it's about a quarter of the way done of the trip by the time Richard and I met up. So, okay, mate, here's a moment of truth, and I do have audio of this somewhere. Okay, mate, here's a moment of truth. Here's your Foster's. Cheers. Have a drink, and almost instantly I spat it out, and it went everywhere, and we were hoping that I didn't wreck his computer or anything like that. And I've said something like, and I'm not usually a kind of person to swear on air or anything like that, but I'm like, mate, that is absolute cat's piss. And of course, Richard, being Richard, he just could not stop laughing. He thought it was funny. Like, obviously, he didn't want his computer gear to be wrecked or anything like that, but it was just a moment of gold. Which, if we were doing that today, you'd have cameras around and all that sort of stuff. But we were audio guys. Had a really cool radio voice. I think he'd even studied broadcasting at some point. He did work at Circuit City before they went belly up. But there was some sad news the other day. One of the members of his family posted that we lost Richard last week. And that was sad. I hadn't spoken to him for quite some time. Didn't see him online or anything like that. He was, even when we were talking and everything like that, he wasn't a guy to necessarily, post a lot of things online or whatever. He was older than I was. And it was sad that we lost him. Richard, friend of the show, as they say. Hope his family and his friends are doing okay. I know it's tough when you lose someone. I don't know the circumstances, but it's always hard. Doesn't matter if it's expected or not. So a lot of you probably got no idea who I'm talking about, but it was a bit sad. But it also prompted me, and I'm thinking, got a bit of time this winter. And I've been watching a whole heap of reaction videos and thinking, okay, I'm not a hot blonde from Queensland or whatever that can basically... A lot of people think they can leave that job and just do YouTube and content creation full time. Some can do it, but there's no way that I'd be able to go down that path considering my actual career. But it's a great great side thing. So that was one of the things that I thought, well, with what I know now, and I could easily bring you a lot of things that I couldn't have brought you at the time, but I can now. So it's just not going to be a personal diary, but, there might be a new band that I want to introduce to you, like I've introduced to somebody at work, Tardigrade Inferno as an example. I'll do that on another episode. Music that I'm listening to, audiobooks that I'm watching, YouTube channels that I'm watching. Somebody the other day asked me if I'm on Instagram, and I said I'm too old for Instagram. Anything that sort of is important enough on Instagram or TikTok, I'm way too old for TikTok. It'll come to YouTube or Facebook eventually, and I'll probably see it there. So I don't think we're moving. So I'd like to thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Just a reminder, just to finish up, that this is the shirt of the episode, the shirt that I'm wearing from NTL Sticker Collective, or Newcastle Sticker Collective if you like. Use discount code ERKPOD10 for 10% off any purchase. Use the QR code on screen. ntlstickercollective.com.au/democracy manifest. Discount code ERKPOD10 for 10% off any purchase from the Democracy Manifest Guy catalogue things that I have created. Arrested by police. What is the charge? Eating a succulent Chinese meal, YouTube sensation. ntlstickercollective.com.au/democracy manifest. Use the discount code ERKPOD10 for 10% off any purchase. And that's a thing that I've had to move into a bit in relation to hockey as well. Lots of hockey stories over time. Reaction videos, things that I'm doing, things that I'm sharing. It's been great to be back, and it's a massive change from being in a park in Kingswood in Western Sydney with a little dictaphone, or walking around America with a H4n audio recorder. Now that I've got a whole heap of different cameras for different tasks, don't forget, lots of gaming action on Simulated Erk. Like, subscribe. This podcast available on YouTube, and I believe, we're actually moving. Available on YouTube, ErkPod 2025. And I believe it also goes out in audio. I don't know how YouTube does it, but it does it apparently. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you have enjoyed. I've been Eric Brook. ErkPod is back. Welcome back, ErkPod. Thank you very much. Ta-ta and farewell.